We are counting down the days to June 2nd and the primary for the 2026 State Superintendent of Public Instruction race, and we're thrilled to be joined by one of the candidates, Josh Newman. Josh, thrilled to be with you. Let's start with this. Why is now the right time for you to make your run for SPI?
And thank you for having me. So I am a former state senator. I served from 2016 through 2024, and for my last 2 years in office, I was the chair of the state Senate Committee on Education, and this is a kind of a natural continuation of that work. We in California's education system really challenged, really diverse, geographically expansive, huge. 5.8 million students across more than 1,000 districts, over 58 very different counties, over 10,000 schools. And what we are desperately in need of in California is better alignment and better collaboration up and down the system. And so that is my focus. That was my focus as chair of education, and that will be my focus as superintendent. We need a superintendent that will work closely with county boards of supervisors, county boards of education, and with superintendents and administrators at every level, so that we can identify best practices, get resources to where they're needed, and start reducing some of the burdens that we've foisted upon schools over the last several years around compliance and paperwork, and free up educators to teach students and get the best outcomes for every student across this big system.
Your response in there, you had two words: alignment and collaboration. So that brings up the question about what do you believe to be the biggest issues that we're facing in public education here in the state of California?
Well, I guess the way I'd answer is I'd say first, we have a coherence or an alignment problem. And so we have layered initiative upon initiative across the system over so many years. But we haven't really always given either the tools, the guidance, or the support to administrators and to educators to actually implement these programs. And so we have to figure out how to better do that. We also have a workforce problem in California. We are seeing educators leave the workforce. We are having increased challenges actually filling the educator workforce pipeline. And this is especially acute today, where the emphasis on AI, technical STEAM becomes so pronounced. So that will be a priority. And finally, I'd say we have a relevance problem in California. We have 5.8 million students, but we're seeing declining enrollment and also chronic absenteeism and students who are just kind of disappearing. And that points to a need to create a better environment for learning, a more relevant and engaging environment for learning, so we can bring kids back into the system and get them on the right path, either for college, for the workforce, and I would argue, more generally, to be, full and participating members of their communities as well.
Josh, Governor Gavin Newsom certainly made some news at his State of the State address in the past few weeks, talked about the role of the SPI and perhaps the need to take power away from the SPI. And I wonder your thoughts on all of it and what you think the role of the state superintendent of public instruction should look like moving forward.
It really is an interesting question. So California is actually one of 10 states that actually has an elected superintendent. The other 40 have an appointed secretary of education or the equivalent. And I actually published an op-ed in, I think, late April, early May in the LA Times, where I think that's a necessary conversation we need to have about the role of the superintendent and sort of the alignment and relationship of education to the other branches of government, especially the executive branch. And so the governor's proposal is part of the way there. And so there's kind of three scenarios. Leave it alone. Status quo doesn't seem to be working too well. This proposal, I think, is part of a necessary conversation to the broader questions about how do we improve alignment, accountability, coordination, collaboration, not just between the executive branch, SSPI, or the Department of Education and the legislature, but also, within all of these entities as well. And so this will evolve, I think, as it moves through the budget or legislative process. But these are important questions to have. And so wherever it ends up, you'll still have a superintendent. That person's responsibilities might be a little bit different, but the need remains the same. Is you still need somebody to be the voice for excellence, for reform, for improvement, and for collaboration, innovation in the system, across the broader effort. And so no matter what happens, we're still going to need a superintendent who is experienced, in Sacramento with the legislative process, who can work well with the next governor, whoever he or she may be, to elevate all of the issues that are facing education in California.
I want to ask you about what's been happening decision wise in Washington, D.C., because we've seen a lot from our federal government over the past year, the attempts to dismantle the Department of Education. How would you make sure that no matter what is happening in Washington, that we're still keeping students at the forefront?
That is an important issue. And so, what we've seen from this administration is part of it is philosophical, part of it is, frankly, political. And California finds itself in the crosshairs of the Trump administration on so many issues, but especially around education. And so, so the recent threats to withhold funding for small and rural school districts, for special ed, for school lunches, eventually actually dissipated, but not without, sort of huge sort of inconvenience and alarm at the state level. And so it's really important for leaders across every level to stay focused, but also to work closely with the AG, for instance. Attorney General Bono's been, very active, very effective in pushing back. Next governor is going to have to continue to do that for a couple of years. And the superintendent and kind of the larger system is going to have to stay focused on the most important issue, which is centering student learning and making sure that students, families, and educators have the assurance that they'll have the resources and the support that they'll need to continue making education improve in California.
Per pupil spending at an all-time high in the state of California, and yet doesn't exactly seem to be translating into test scores. California ranks kind of middle of the pack when you look at math and reading. And so it begs the question, Josh, how do you work with districts as state superintendent of public instruction to make sure that that level of funding translates to better scores in math and reading?
So to your point, we have approximately doubled per student spending over the past decade or so. And we have not seen a concurrent improvement in assessment scores. So middle of the pack is actually quite generous.
Yeah.
By most metrics, we're between 30th and 37th on overall educational achievement. Most recent assessment statistics really concerning, right? Less, give or take, a third of students are reading or reading at grade level proficiency. Even worse in math and even worse in science. 31% of students are at grade level proficiency in science standards. And that should be alarming to anybody, but especially in a state like California, where we pride ourselves on being the epicenter of new technologies like AI and like tech. And so we have to really think seriously about it. If it's not about money, it's about some other things. And it's really about, as I mentioned earlier, it's about alignment and collaboration. There are some really good examples of excellence in learning, innovation across the state. We need to figure out how to identify those centers and better sort of replicate and expand those learnings into the broader system. And so to do that, we need a much better alignment, between at the state level down to superintendents at the LEA level to make sure that where we find practitioners that have unlocked, better solutions to pedagogy or other forms of support that get better outcomes. We need to learn from that. But we also need to give those educators who are doing good work more autonomy so they can point the way toward these improvements without the burdens that we've seen with compliance and paperwork.
This is one of the deepest fields that we've seen for the position of SPI in quite some time. There are a lot of really qualified candidates. So, what sets you apart from the other candidates out there in this race for SPI?
So I come to this race as a former legislator with I think, a very deep experience in policymaking over the last 8 years, especially as chair of education. And so I think I am, distinguished by sort of my dual insights, both at the systems level, but also the classroom level. I have spent lots and lots of time in classrooms over the last several years, working with stakeholders across the education system, having, I think, the important conversations to find better solutions, to find better policy approaches. And I think as an example of that, I've done some good legislation. One I did directly, in the service of superintendents. That was SB 494 in 2023 to make sure that any termination proceeding in California was, done properly and not at the expense of governments or the districts or the students in the district. And I've also, really been fortunate working with some really talented people, including superintendents. Another piece of legislation I did very proud of was SB 1244 in 2024. That idea came to me from the superintendent of the Florida Joint Union High School District. And what it's done is it's expanded to enrollment opportunities across the system to the benefit of students all over California. I bring that approach, that kind of collaborative system level approach to the work. And I think I've shown it in my prior record. And I think, that ability at the state level in any scenario of, sort of the future definition of SSPI responsibilities is going to be essential to maintaining progress toward the broader goal of improving education in California.
June 2nd, the date of the primary for the state superintendent of public instruction. Josh Newman, appreciate you taking some time, spending a few minutes with us, and best of luck in the weeks and months ahead.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.